Welcome to Leadership Where It Matters Most. The family is the most important institution in the world. The future of the church passes through the family. The church has the greatest mission of any organization ever. Go and make disciples of all nations. The family and the church. This is where leadership matters most. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to Leadership Where It Matters Most. Today's guest is Matt Rudolph. Matt is a husband. He's a father of 4 children. In 2015, Matt joined the founders of Amazing Parish, that is Patrick Lencioni and John Martin. And then he spent the next 8 years leading their coaching and content efforts for nearly 1,000 priests and bishops across the United States. He most recently served as the executive director of Amazing Parish and recently stepped down to pursue his passion for helping priests integrate human formation, leadership, and healing. In co-founding Chrism, he hopes to equip even more clergy with practical skills and confidence so that they can become leaders and spiritual fathers that they are called to be. So Matt and his associate, Dr. Jim Langley, launched this wonderful ministry called Chrism for a thriving priesthood. And Matt, when I reached out to him, I knew we would have kind of, we're just kindred spirits, I guess you could say. There's a lot of things that we think the same way on and act and have had similar experiences and all the rest of it. So Matt and Chrism is going to be a great gift to the church. In today's conversation, Matt shares a little bit about his testimony. We find out kind of what helped prompt him and Jim to launch Chrism. We just talk about clergy kind of in the space that they're in right now and what Chrism's model for ministry to clergy is all about, the idea of self-awareness, self-possession, and self-gift. Yeah, we have once again another kind of meandering conversation that really explores a lot of different topics, all with the purpose around helping our clergy thrive in their life and ministry. And then we find out at the end how we can connect with Matt and Chrism online. So without further ado, enjoy this episode. Matthew Rudolph, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Brett, thanks so much for having me. It's a great joy.
Yeah, it's great to have you. This is our first meeting, you and me. We have mutual friends, which we've kind of talked about. And when I saw the website with Chrism, I was like, oh man, I got to have these guys on. So I'm just so glad that you're able to be here.
Well, thanks for having me, Brett. It really is a joy. And just even the connections that we have. I don't know you well at all, but I have a feeling we're going to have a lot of connections and be kindred spirits at the end of this.
You betcha. So for those listeners who maybe don't know as much as they should know about Matthew Rudolph, why don't you just tell us a little bit about the journey that you're on that kind of led you to where you are?
Oh, thanks, Brett. Yeah, I'm not always the king of concise, so I'm going to do my best here to hit the main points. But I grew up cradle Catholic, very faithful Catholic home. The faith was taught to me. I'm so grateful for that. I learned a lot of discipline and, had a job even as a, 4th grader. I was a paper boy and, learned a lot of the value of discipline and hard work, and very grateful to my parents for that. What I discovered about myself when I went to college, I had the privilege of going to Franciscan University. I discovered just a lot of new charisms of the faith that I hadn't been exposed to before. And I learned a lot about myself. I'm an ENFP in Myers-Briggs. I have just a lot of, sense the Holy Spirit moving in a lot of ways, and kind of learned a different application of the faith, kind of living life more open to the Holy Spirit and more, structure with some spontaneity, some room for the Lord to really move and work. And so I got the great privilege of doing lots of ministry there, a lot of incredible formation, got to lead a lot of mission trips, and just really felt like formation for mission was such a great gift that I received there. And I was discerning priesthood, Brett, for about 10 years before college and also in college. And the Lord, shortly after I graduated, really closed that door, kind of slammed it in my face, actually. And when he slammed that door in my face, he opened up the door to my now wife, and we had started dating, and praise God, she was open to dating me. So, but anyways, I had such a great love for the priest, and even had this longing to be a priest. I saw the needs in the church. I saw the hunger and the hurt in the church. And for a long time, felt like I was called to be a spiritual father to support that. But God had other plans. So fast forward, I worked for a diocese for a couple years. I love the work of diocese, but I also saw the dysfunction there, and that really bothered me. And I kind of thought, man, I don't know that I can work in an environment like this. I just want to be on mission. So I kind of made the decision I wasn't going to work for the church anymore. Did some business work, ran some sales teams, loved that work, but really felt this call back to serve the church. I felt like some gifts and some passions weren't being used. And so he called me back into ministry. I joined an apostolate that provided leadership coaching and training for priests, and ran their content, ran the coaching there, really developed a program that priests could use to build healthy teams. And since then, Brett, I was there for about 8 years, and since then I've really felt the Lord calling me to serve in integrative coaching and support for priests. So yes, leadership is such an important thing. We have a crisis of leadership, but I think we also have a crisis of healthy manhood. And so we got to look at all of these areas. Leadership is, of course, a problem. We address that with this new ministry, Chrism, that we launched recently, but we're looking at the whole man behind the collar. We're looking at his human formation and leadership, as well as his mental health and healing, as well as his spiritual health and renewal. And looking at all these areas, he can't only be thriving in one of those areas. All three are necessary for him to be thriving in his priesthood. And so that's been my journey to this. And many of my dearest friends are priests, and I just learned so much about them, their needs. I have such a great love for them and want to see a thriving priesthood in our country and beyond.
That's awesome. I want to hear more about the story, but this is one of the things that captured me when I spent some time on the website. Even just the simple word integrated or integration was it just resonated within my heart, because even in my work with men, not clergy, but just men, that's the pain point. It's this: good men want to live an integrated life. They want to thrive at home in their role as husband and father, and they want to contribute significantly in the workplace. And often they feel this tension that they're cheating one or the other. And you can't go either or. It is both and. There's a magnanimity to a wholeness of formation and development as we are. And I think that's God's design. So we'll get more and more into that. But I mean, tell me a little bit more. You were just sharing with me offline that moment in the chapel, if you will, because the only ministry that we want to do is the ministry God wants us to do, right?
Yep.
And Chrism was really birthed in your heart in an encounter with the Lord in adoration, my understanding. So maybe just share a little bit of that with the audience here.
Yeah. So Brett, I was praying in adoration, and just kind of, those moments when you're struggling with the Lord, probably like, maybe a fight of sorts. What are you doing? I wish I had more clarity. Lord, you've called me to this place. Now what? And just kind of, I wouldn't say that patience is naturally a strength of mine. And so it was probably one of those moments of impatience in prayer. And, the Lord he does this every so often. This was actually, as I discerned out of priesthood, it was one of those moments. So it's kind of another one of those moments where he just gave me this gift of this vision, and actually gave me the name Chrism for this new ministry, and really just revealed a lot of the data points that I had experienced in 8 years of doing coaching with priests and bishops, some of the pains and the sufferings, and then the solutions really coming together. And what I saw, Brett, is that too often we want to deal with the surface of problems. We want to deal with the symptoms of problems. And we actually, as men, sometimes feel good. Like it allows us to say, yeah, look at what we accomplished. Like we did something, we overcame this thing. And I just really saw that and had this sense that, there's suffering in the priesthood. There's suffering in a presbyterate. So in a diocese of, brother priests, there's a lack of unity among those men. There's a lack of unity among the bishop and his priests. The Lord desires unity. He said, that they may be one, Father, as we are one. And that really just kept coming up in prayer. And, every priest is ordained into the same priesthood of Jesus Christ. The same priesthood of Jesus Christ. There's unity in that priesthood. And without going too far into it, Brett, we can talk more about that, but I think that is really this driving factor behind Chrism, is this unity. It's your identity as a priest of Jesus Christ, not a priest of this bishop who ordained me, or this priest who went to this seminary, or, because conservative priest, liberal priest. Like, this is the priesthood of Jesus Christ. And we're helping priests live that authentically with who they are, their unique gifts and talents. They don't have to be an all-star priest who, records podcasts and is on EWTN all the time. God can use who they are. And so really it's this, we're helping priests discover how God uniquely made them and helping them grow in virtue in the areas that need to be grown to be a thriving priest, but also surrendering the areas that you're not good at and saying, Lord, you made me to need others. I do need a team. I do need supporters. I do need iron to sharpen iron. And so God just really gave this, the simple model that day, the simple model for Chrism that very day. So I'm very grateful.
Yeah.
I needed it.
Yeah, I'm sure. The experience you had flows from some of your history, and I think I'm okay to mention, but the apostolate that you referred to is Amazing Parish, right? That you were with for a number of years.
Yep.
So some people will be familiar with Amazing Parish. But I want to just peel back a little bit and ask you, Matthew, from your perspective, when you speak about the suffering in the priesthood, and obviously I'm not asking you to reveal dirt or anything like that, but maybe give us some understanding from your perspective and your history, what else that suffering is. Like, you talk about the disunity. Certainly I've seen that in the work presbyterates that I've worked with. Even something like as simple as there seems to be an air sometimes of suspicion within presbyterate. And it's out of that place that maybe somebody who's beginning to thrive, it's almost like we misjudge their intentions of what are they trying to accomplish through this parish renewal initiative or, whatever, right? So, but from your experience, what are some of those pain points, some of those elements of suffering that our clergy in today's world are dealing with?
Yeah, this is a great question. And it's hard to, here we go with trying to be concise here, but there's so much to talk about here. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned, I just want to address, you said suspicion of brother priests in a presbyterate. I see this. And at the end of the day, Brett, there's lots of human dynamics at play, right? But there's also spiritual dynamics. And I think we have to look at those two things when we look at the church and the problems that we're facing. And God calls broken men to the priesthood, men that are just as broken as you and just as broken as me.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, we want to assume that they're different than us. We want to assume that they're almost, this, once they're ordained and their hands are consecrated and they're set apart for ministry, there's this indelible mark, which is all true. Yeah. That is all true. And yet they are still the man that they are.
Yeah. They are not preternatural men. Right?
Exactly. And so I think this is actually part of that loneliness and the pain that they experience, is that we have this expectation of them that is not fair. It's not real. It's not reality. Their personalities don't change. Their giftedness doesn't change with ordination. They're still men that need support. They have human needs. They have physical needs, emotional needs, spiritual needs. And too often we see them as, well, Father, Father is this figure for us, versus he's a man that's been called to a different vocation than us. And praise God for that. But I think what we're dealing with when you think about those divisions, even in a presbyterate, is they're still men, men that still struggle with the human things. If they see a brother priest who is thriving in his assignment, his parish is booming, and he's at an assignment and it's not thriving, and he's feeling really discouraged and doesn't have the resources or the type of people in his parish, it's easy to feel jealousy in those moments. Or, many priests desperately want to be fathered by their bishop or be mentored by an older priest that has been through the ropes. And we don't have a system that really creates that environment and that culture in a presbyterate. Once you become a pastor, oftentimes priests feel like they have to do it alone. And similarly, when a bishop becomes a bishop, similar experience. It's like, here's a diocese. And right, there's a lot of feeling like you have to do it on your own. And I do think that is, there's a human dynamic. There's also a spiritual dynamic. I think the enemy's at play when men are given a higher responsibility in the church. The devil's after them saying, you're alone. You got to figure this out on your own. There's a lot of embarrassment and shame in your weaknesses. And so I guess I want to just speak to the side that I've seen as the human side. I see the human dynamics, and the devil sees our human weaknesses and is at prey on us in those areas. And I think that's very real in a presbyterate. I think it's real for priests that feel ill-equipped to do the responsibilities and the job that they've been asked to do. I've also seen this with bishops too, a similar gap in confidence. And so the devil, he loves it. He loves to see us feeling insecure and unconfident and ashamed. And he is on the prowl for our dear priests. So
It's so true. You're a married man, I'm a married man, both of us in ministry. And I've often thought, outside of the gift of salvation, my wife is the greatest gift God has given me. And there's something just, I think, naturally occurs in a good, holy marriage where some of those pain points and suffering in isolation, carrying burdens that nobody knows about, nobody appreciates, that you can begin to resent them. And yet my wife can just hold up a mirror and in one look, one glance, one sentence, the world is right again because somebody acknowledges it. And yet so many men, just on a natural level, that are clergy, good men carrying burdens for the sake of others, which means very Christ-like and therefore hated by the enemy, because anything that reminds him of Jesus is hated. And yet they don't have that.
Yep.
And so another pain point that I think magnifies all these other sufferings is just the lack of fellowship among the brothers.
Yep.
You see that? You agree with that?
Oh, totally. And so St. John Vianney says, and I'm embarrassed, I can't remember if he says hundreds or thousands of souls. So someone can correct me. We can maybe share it in the show notes what the actual quote is. But I think St. John Vianney said, the devil is after priests so much. He's after all of us, but priests in particular, because he knows that a priest who goes to heaven takes thousands of souls with him there. And a priest that goes to hell takes thousands of souls with him there.
Wow. I've never heard that quote.
The impact spiritually that this man can have, of course the devil's going to be after him, right? Even John Vianney's story, he had physical battles at night with the enemy. So yeah, I guess I think you're right. This isolation, this loneliness, that of course, just if you're already feeling down about yourself, or you've had a bad day and you put isolation or loneliness on top of that, oh man, that's a recipe for disaster. So a lot of this work that we're doing now, Brett, is helping men know themselves, know what they need to thrive, right? And what you need to thrive is maybe different than me. But as you said, you remember who you are. You remember you're reinforced in your vocation. You're kind of edified when you get time with your wife. That vocation and that relationship shows you who you are. Priests need that too. And if they're not getting it in the right places, there's this temptation to find it in the wrong places. And so, I think one of the gifts that we offer priests is this understanding, this empathy, this, we're not going to judge you. We're going to hold you to a high standard because that is what the priesthood of Jesus Christ requires. But we understand that the devil is the ultimate enemy, and he's going to go after you any way that he can. And many priests feel very, very ashamed or embarrassed or not good enough. And the truth is, you aren't good enough. None of us are good enough for what the Lord's called us to. We desperately need his grace and his healing. So yeah, we love to meet priests there and support them and coach them and really help them understand how God made them. So their human tendencies, Brett, like, what is your Myers-Briggs? What is your working genius? What is your temperament? And really wrestling with the realities of that. Okay, I'm naturally good at things on this side, and I'm naturally not good at things on this side. I respond to things quickly, slowly. I need time to think. I rejuvenate this way. I am motivated by these things. People versus tasks, right? All are good. But if we don't have that self-knowledge and self-awareness, we can never really grow in the virtue. We can never grow in self-possession, so that ultimately a priest can make a gift of himself in his priesthood.
Yeah.
So that's really what we're going after with Chrism.
That's awesome. And I want to, hopefully we can unpack that a little bit more, because I just really believe, I think this is theologically accurate, but there was a moment in time when everybody in the world was first conceived in their mother's womb, and nobody really knew except God. Mm-hmm. And even before the moment of conception, that person existed as an idea in God's mind. Mm-hmm. And it was noble and good and magnificent. And that's why he created this person. And so, these men, they have an identity in the Lord, even deeper than the priesthood. And the priesthood is an indelible mark. Like, this is in persona Christi. And so I love the approach of helping these men become self-aware so that they can become self-possessed, so that they can make a sincere gift of self for others.
Yep.
That is awesome. So
Yes.
I guess my question is, you can say more about that if you'd like, and then even help us to understand how Chrism supports our clergy in developing that self-awareness, self-possession, and self-gift.
Yeah, man, there's so much there, Brett. So John Paul II talked a lot about this unique design. And I just want to share a quote here. He says, "For God and before God, the human being is always unique and unrepeatable. Somebody thought of and chosen from eternity. Some called, identified by his own name." So thinking about that, unique and unrepeatable, someone thought of and chosen from eternity. And I love it. Like, it speaks to that uniqueness. Each human being is unique and unrepeatable. Each priest is a soul, unique and unrepeatable. And there's this anonymity. This is another suffering of priests, this anonymity, that when a priest wears a collar, praise God, he's identifying himself as a man that belongs to the priesthood of Jesus Christ. Like, it is this outside symbol of this is who I am, but it isn't his entire identity. And I think that's where sometimes there can be this loneliness that priests experience. There's this anonymity behind the collar, and that's not how God intended it. And I love things like, but I don't know if you like the chosen. That could be another thing we talk about another time. But what I do love about it is it shows the unique personalities of all the apostles and how they interact with Jesus. And you get all of it. You get the messiness of humanity and how we're wired and our different preferences. And I think that that's really healthy for a priest to be able to show that, to show his humanity, even as he faithfully strives to be a priest of Jesus Christ. So yeah. I think that's something too. John Paul II talks a lot about unique design. So in our work, we talk a lot about that. We do cohorts and coaching for priests, and unique design is a huge part of it. Ultimately, and this is connected to the other work that you do, Brett, with the men's ministry. You know, I think that every human being desires to make a gift of self, but I think men in particular, and without getting crude here, our bodies are wired to make a gift of self. And I think for priests, we have to really wrestle with that. There's these tendencies, there's these inclinations that are good. They're from God. They're like masculine. They're masculine tendencies. They're not bad tendencies. We need to infuse virtue into those tendencies. Otherwise, we as men can be crazy. But how do we take those tendencies, those desires, those holy desires, help a man understand himself, grow in virtue, self-awareness, self-possession, so that he can make a gift of self? Ultimately, that's what every man desires, and priests are no different. It's really important that we create space for that. And John Paul II, once again, talks about, and this is from Gaudium Spes originally, but John Paul II reinforced it over and over again, that man does not find himself, he does not fully find himself until he's made a gift of self, a sincere gift of self. Sorry, I'm butchering that. Sorry to those who remember details. The details to me take a while. Wait, how did he say that again? But
I get it.
Man does not fully find himself until he makes a sincere gift of self. And I'm convicted of that. When I'm feeling lost, it's so easy to want to pacify myself. I want to get on my phone. I want to look at a screen. I want to eat something or drink something. I want to do something that feels good. But actually, that makes me lose myself even more. It's when I give of myself. It's when I pour myself out that I truly find myself more. And so we know what that looks like in marriage. When there's ownership of our time by our wives or our children. And I think for priests, when you don't have that accountability and you don't have those physical, tangible people in front of you, it's difficult after an exhausting day to choose behaviors that continue to help you grow and thrive and make a gift of yourself. And so a lot of that too is just kind of saying, look, integration is about integrity, I think, Brett, right? There's the words are rooted in similar words. So integration and integrity. It's, am I behaving? Am I who I am in this scenario and that scenario and that scenario? Or am I changing who I am and how I behave based on different situations? So, for us as married men, am I different in my interactions with my wife with my kids, with my friends, with my, people in my ministry? Am I different in those places, or do I have integrity and integration of who I am in those places? Similarly for a priest, right? Are you a good and holy priest just when you're preaching and forward facing with your parishioners and your people? Or are you a good and holy priest in all aspects of your life? Do you have that integrity? So yeah, integration I think is so important, Brett, for us as men, period, but especially for our priests, because I think the devil's out to get them even more than us sometimes.
Yeah. Oh man, there's a lot there. Just as you were talking this last little bit, Matthew, I was struck even in my own story where I can become a chameleon. I can be a certain man in a certain group and another man in another group, neither man necessarily being bad, but just different. And my question to myself is, why? What am I trying to extract from this situation by presenting myself as being different? And that's kind of the opposite of self-gift. I'm trying to, in a certain sense, take from others by presenting them a certain way, that affirmation maybe that I need. Whereas the high calling is to know exactly who you are, high self-awareness, be entirely self-possessed, and then make a sincere gift of self, knowing that
Yes.
you don't have to be all things to all people. Only
Yes.
Jesus can meet every need in the human heart. And yet, and the priest could be like that. Like, just think of the constituencies, the cohorts, the cliques in a community, and the temptation to be this, to be that, to be this, to be that. And you just
Yes.
get exhausted, man. That's no way to
Yes.
live. No way to live your life. You want to be the same person no matter where you are or who you're with. That's I think John Eldredge calls it the utter relief of holiness and
Yes.
wholeness, right?
Yes. Yes. And Brett, there's so much freedom and joy in that. Comparison is the thief of joy. So
Yeah.
if I looked at your gifts and your ministry and your podcast and I was like, man, I wish I was doing it just like Brett, I would not be doing what God is uniquely calling me to. Right. And I think too often our dear priests feel this comparison, and maybe they're introverted. I work with a lot of priests, and most of them right now that I'm working with are introverted. And they feel this pressure to show up as an extrovert constantly because those are more attractive priests in their minds, or they're going to be more out there with the people. And that's actually what's more pastoral. Now, there are times you have to turn it on and you have to be, facing your parishioners and out there and maybe turn on some energetic, disposition that you might not naturally have. But God's not calling you to be an extroverted priest if he's created you to be an introvert, right?
Right.
It's
Yeah.
about that self-discovery of who you are and what are the unique gifts you bring to the table with your introversion. And of course, stretching yourself, right? We have to stretch ourselves for our children and for our wives and for whatever the Lord's calling us to. Like, I'm not saying I am who I am, so I'm going to stay put, but there is this self-acceptance. I am who I am. I have my human limitations. God can do anything, though. His grace can give me supernatural energy or supernatural charisma if that's what's needed. And I think he does that sometimes, but you don't have to change who you are for God to use you. He delights in how he made you. And some of the work we do, Brett, is just helping priests rediscover their identity, how the Father delights in them. He delights in all the traits that he gave them when he created them, right? And allowing priests to just pause for a moment and to ask them, how do you think the Father delights in you and how he created you? Priests don't get asked that question. It's like, Father, why aren't you better at this? And why isn't he better at that? And, do more, do more, do more. And perhaps there are things that he needs to do more of. But let's begin with who you are. How did God uniquely create you? What is your unique design? Appreciate that. Celebrate that. And then say, okay, if this is who I am and this is what I'm called to, now what? What virtues, what skills, how do I need to grow, right? The Lord is always calling us to ongoing conversion and ongoing growth. And so, but it's not because who you are is not good enough, right? And so that can't be the motivation. It's a great joy to help priests really discover their unique design. And I see a lot of priests go from just thinking, man, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not like this guy. I'm not like that guy, to, wow, I can really see now how God made me is actually a gift for my people. And if I stop wanting to be someone else and start accepting more who I am, I have the greater capacity to make a gift of myself.
That's great. I mean, is there, how do I want to ask this? Because I don't want to out anybody or invite you to say something maybe that should be held in modesty discreet, but like, can you give examples of priests that have made that discovery and the impact that it has had on their life and their ministry? Is there anything that comes to mind? Because that's as you're describing it, I think of certain men, and I just am filled with joy for them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I won't share any of the heavier examples, but I think some simple examples would be helpful.
Yeah.
We do a lot of work around temperaments, right? And, we have choleric or choleric, as some will say. We have sanguine, melancholic, phlegmatic. So learning this about myself helps me understand my strengths and my weaknesses, the good tendencies that I have and the bad tendencies that I might have, right? And so I'm a sanguine choleric. So those are the two temperaments that are highest for me. Next is melancholic, and then finally phlegmatic. Very little phlegmatic. Phlegmatics are driven by harmony and peace. Sanguines are driven by relationships. They like novelty. Cholerics are driven by the ideal, and melancholics are driven more by ideals. So helping priests understand, if you're trying to change a habit or trying to grow in virtue, and you're not a choleric or you're not a melancholic that has high ideals, if you're just saying, I need to hit this goal, I need to pray more, I need to be more of this, I need to be more of that, that ideal doesn't really drive your temperament if you're a phlegmatic or a sanguine. So what does drive you? What does motivate you? And I've seen priests be able to say, gosh, I haven't been able to shake this bad habit, or I haven't been able to build this good habit or build virtue in this area. And it's because they don't really know, they haven't discovered what motivates them, and they've just been trying to white knuckle it. Right. So I think one tangible example would be that, a priest that's struggling in his prayer life and, pours himself out and is constantly responding to the needs of his people, but at his own prayer life, his own spiritual life suffering.
Yeah.
And we discovered, based on his temperament, well, gosh, the motivation just to like white knuckle it and do it and get to the finish line, that's not a healthy motivation for you. That doesn't motivate you in the morning or when you're feeling down or exhausted. So let's tap into what does motivate you, Father, because God made you to be wired and motivated towards that in those ways.
Yeah.
So that's one example. Another example, I'm just going to stick with temperaments for now, but there's so many other examples here. A priest who's a melancholic or a phlegmatic responds more slowly to stimulation, right? They take more time to process things. And the melancholic, as time goes on, the intensity that they feel towards that thing increases. Whereas for a phlegmatic, it's kind of low intensity no matter what. Sanguines and cholerics, they respond quickly to stimulation. For the sanguine, it fizzles out pretty quickly. For the choleric, if there's an ideal there, that consistency stays put for a long time. Working with one priest, he was just sharing how he discovered this about himself, that he's a melancholic. And, there's this tendency to I want to respond quickly. I want to make fast decisions. When people need something from me, he's like, I am who I am. Like, I need time to process. So before making a hasty decision, now I just say, I need a day or two to process that and I'll get back to you. Or I need a little bit of time. Okay, even if it's urgent, let me think about it for a little bit and I'll get right back to you. So kind of taking ownership of, I need to process things internally. I can't respond with a quick answer. And many priests feel this pressure. Someone's knocking at my door. They schedule this meeting. We need an answer yesterday. Gosh, that priest that's a melancholic will never feel confident in sharing his opinion until he's had that time to think and reflect. So, and it's a great gift. God gave him that personality. So when he takes the time to think and reflect, God's going to use him and his personality to make the right decision for his parish. So like, let's give our priests more space to be who they are and to set boundaries on how they need to operate so that they can be thriving in their priesthood. So those are two things. I have other examples around working genius, which is a great tool that we utilize all the time. Strengths Finder, all of these, there's so many great tools right now that we have.
Yeah.
Charisms, but just that self-knowledge allows you to say, okay, I have these gifts, and they're all given from God. They're not gifts that I earned on my own or have, through my own merit. They're gifts that are given to me. And the more that I acknowledge them and discover them and own them, the more the Lord will use them in your ministry.
That's awesome. It reminded me, I was working with a pastoral leader one time, and very choleric. And he was really wrestling and was causing a lot of issue for him, because being in the position that he was, he saw a lot of disorder, a lot of injustice, and these things would stir within him a holy discontent.
Yeah.
But in his mind, he was convinced that he's called to be a man of peace and kindness and equilibrium and all this kind of stuff. So he's pushing it down until the situation gets so bad, he blows up and, ends up hurting and then has to apologize, which confirms to him he shouldn't have been so frustrated and angry. And I'm like, no, there is a holiness inside of you that recognizes the gap between what is and what can be. And you're allowed to be angry, but do not sin. This was Jesus. And I'm convinced that Jesus, in the temple, flipping tables and cracking a whip, was left in the canon of Scripture for clerics to understand that there can be a holiness to the discontent and to the frustration. But if you don't have that self-awareness, and if it's not situated and categorized in ways that are true and empowering and fully understandable, then man, you can just so quickly write yourself off or diminish or, whatever. So yeah, great examples.
Oh, yeah. I love that. If I can just speak to, I have a thought on that. I think even in Jesus and his model of conflict, it's so helpful because, so we do a lot of work around conflict. We spend a whole month in these cohorts around healthy conflict and building your confidence in leading and managing and navigating conflict as a priest. Because fathers, we know this is a part of your daily life.
Exactly.
Conflict is just a part of leadership and leading others. And so, looking at Jesus and how he dealt with conflict in so many different situations, right? To your point, Brett, there's a scenario where righteous anger gets him fired up and he's flipping over tables. And there's also moments where, he's having conflict with someone who has committed a sin, and in his mercy, he says, go and sin no more, and then he also calls out the Pharisees and the Sadducees in a different way, right? He has a different disposition when he engages in conflict. And what I love about it is that he shows up in a way that's appropriate for the situation, what's necessary for the situation. So he has mastery over his emotions, unlike perhaps that choleric priest that was just, and it is righteous anger. It's super frustrating to see things like that happen. But Jesus had self-possession enough to know, okay, this is a time to be flipping tables, and this is a time to be more patient, and this is a time to call out specifically the Pharisee or the Sadducee that needs to be called out. And I love his example of virtue, and it's said that Jesus is kind of the perfection of all these temperaments. And so he was able to fully give of himself, right? He had self-possession at all those times and showed up the way that he had to. Another thing I want to say is personality type, right? If you're talking about Myers-Briggs, if you're talking about strengths, if you're talking about working genius or temperaments, it does not give you freedom to show up every single time with the extremes of your personality or your natural disposition, right? That is not at all what we're saying. What we're saying is that in that self-knowledge, now you can work on virtue and fill in the gaps so that you can have self-possession and make a gift of yourself. And I also want to speak to this. I think self-knowledge and self-possession, Brett, we do a lot of work with just recognizing the areas of our lives that have experienced woundedness. When we've been wounded, it's really hard for us to show up as we are. And I think that might even be why sometimes you said, maybe there's a tendency to be a chameleon or to adjust. I think a lot of times it's because we've been hurt. We're not confident that who we are is enough. And so I just want to speak to that. I don't know that the conversation today needs to go there, but we help priests also recognize the areas of woundedness and bringing some healing into that so that they can show up as they are. They can use those gifts that God has given them to build his kingdom.
I'm glad you mentioned it because, It absolutely is the case. There's wounding. We all have wounds. These wounds inform and animate, and they come out, and sometimes we don't even know. It's real. This is not a sign of weakness, acknowledging those things. It's a sign of humility and walking in truth, because we all have them. And unfortunately, a lot of times they're blind spots to us. So
Yes.
we're not aware of them. We don't see them. We might see the fruit of them, negative.
Hmm.
I'm just so glad you mentioned that, because the wholeness is such a foundation for holiness, such a foundation for the ministry. It absolutely has to be said. There's a line from Andy Stanley. You must be familiar with Andy Stanley. That
Hmm.
I don't endorse everything Andy Stanley says, and that I have to say these things because he said some pretty outlandish things. But he talked about this, charisms and giftedness. And if our giftedness, because you're saying, you can't be the extreme of your personality or your charism, whatever, all the times, but if your giftedness is constantly causing relational, hostility and problems and all that, it's not the gift, it's the gifted. There's
Oh,
a
yeah.
human dimension to it, right?
Yes. Yes.
So living these things out, it doesn't give you an excuse to be this, because, oh, I am who I am. No, we're wounded people, and we need to grow in wholeness and holiness as we go about these things.
Yeah, Brad, I think that's so important. And that speaks to human formation.
Mm,
So the three areas that Chrism focuses on, it's three integrated areas. So not we live in this time where I don't know what it is. It's maybe us as men, we like to compartmentalize things. And part of our
yeah.
mission is integrating these aspects of our humanity. So human formation and leadership, integrated and overlapping with mental health and healing, integrated and overlapping with spiritual health and renewal. And when we look at all of these things, a lot of our work begins with human formation. And when you look at the documents, and even, there's a lot of great renewal and seminary formation right now to focus on integrative formation, specifically with human formation. If you look at the documents, it really talks about, the chipping away, the sharpening of the areas of a man that could prevent someone from knowing Jesus through them. Right? It's like, okay, you talked about, it's not the gift that's the problem, but there's probably a human formation gap. And are you aware of how you're coming off? Do you know that this thing that you do, or this posture that you have, causes this reaction in people, and it actually prevents them from encountering Jesus through you, right?
Mm,
And this is the work of iron sharpening iron. And I've said this for a long time, Brett, that human formation too often is the study of human formation. We
hmm,
intellectualize human formation. It's like, no,
yeah.
no, there's intellectual formation, and that's there. Human formation is truly this self-awareness, this self-growth, and it's iron sharpening iron. It's me saying, Brett, I love you enough to tell you the things that about you are kind of annoying, or at least annoy me. And then we can wrestle with it and see what's true there. But out of love, we need to go there because our mission is so important. And we as men specifically, and I think in the priesthood, we need to get more honest about those things so that a man has more self-awareness and is able to grow in self-possession so he can make a greater gift of himself.
Yeah. Amen. It's funny. This whole blind spot thing, like, one of the best ways I learned how to give behavioral feedback, which is the most difficult feedback to give. It's easy to give feedback on performance, is to simply say something to the effect of, can I just share with you my experience of you right now?
Yeah,
Right.
I love that.
And what a loving thing to do. But there has to be a certain settledness and groundedness in who you are to even receive that. Because, man, if you're not grounded and settled, you can just push back. You don't understand, and all the rest of it. So I guess all that to say, your approach, the integration of all these things is so, I think, timely, prophetic, helpful. So maybe, Matthew, we're coming to the end, and maybe this is the explanation of the model, but feel free to just tell us a little bit more of the Chrism model of how you support and work with priests to fill in the gaps a little bit. I mean, imagine that there are bishops or priests that are listening to this. This is part sales pitch, part explanation. Like, tell us what you need to tell us to really understand the work of Chrism.
Well, thanks, Brett, for that. I think the most important thing that I hope people take away is that an integrated model for formation is what's necessary. When we overemphasize just the spiritual life, right? And don't get me wrong. Ultimately, thriving spiritually is the goal. But when we only focus on the spiritual life, we can very easily downplay the human things that need to grow and improve, or even the mental things, right? It's wonderful to be praying and to be pouring yourself out and fasting, but the Lord wants you to be well mentally and thriving and healed in those areas that need healing. So, right, we can't just pray our way through the things in our life that need support. We work very closely with the Carmelite Sisters of Los Angeles, and they pray for all of our priests. Gosh, I love them. They're just amazing. But they have such a refreshing disposition towards the human person. And they're prayer warriors. They're on their knees constantly. I mean, I'm so edified by their prayer, and I've received, so much grace from their prayer. But they also will be the first to say when a priest is overwhelmed and stressed out and burnt out, Father, maybe you need a good night's sleep and a nice meal before you go to bed.
Right.
Take care of the human. Like Jesus took care of the human side of us as well as the spiritual side. He took care of the mental, the broken side of us as he took care of the spiritual and the human side. So it really is looking at the whole ministry of Jesus and saying he saw the whole person as he ministered. And so we need to do a better job of treating people as whole people. And I think especially our priests as whole people. So our approach is integrated. And what we're doing is we're building an interdisciplinary team of coaches, mental health professionals, so therapists, and spiritual directors that think in an integrative way. The whole needs of the man, the whole needs of the priest, not just spiritual direction is the solution. If you don't have a spiritual director and you're a priest, you do need one. That is part of the solution. But it won't solve everything if you have a lot of other human gaps or mental health gaps, right? So we really want to take this integrated approach, interdisciplinary approach. And the way that we do that, right now, we have lots of plans for 2025 that we're excited about. But right now, we partner with dioceses and we get a group of priests from that diocese and form cohorts, 4 to 6 men that are walking together. And for a year's time, they're going through a lot of the topics we've discussed, right? But it's all through the lens of self-knowledge, self-possession, into self-gift, right? So journeying together and in between those cohorts of learning and conversation and commitments and accountability and prayer, we're offering one-on-one coaching because every man is unique. So, we really do believe in customization for the man as much as possible. Unique design. So what resonates with another guy might not resonate with this other priest, or his unique struggles in his parish or in his assignment might be very different from this other priest. So we create this environment of brotherhood to learn and grow together, and then also offer that one-on-one individualized support. A couple other things that we offer right now, we're piloting a wounds assessment. Dr. Bob Schutz, the founder of the John Paul II Healing Center, partnered with us to create a wounds assessment to help men discover what are those areas of woundedness in their life that hold them back from making a gift of themselves. And so it's great. It's simple right now. If someone's interested, they can email us and get an initial copy of it. We're testing it, and then eventually it'll be a digital assessment that's available. But great tool for priests, great tool for anyone, frankly, to grow in that self-awareness. And then we're also working on a tool called the Integrated Priest Assessment. And Brett, too often we see priests and we pour into them, we invest in them. We invest a ton of money once a priest is burnt out and has made a big mistake or has done something terrible or has just totally burnt out and needs to be sent away for treatment. But what about protecting that man from getting to that place? What if we could see the yellow flags or, some of the things that he might be struggling with before he gets to this place of burnout, and we have to remove him from ministry, and, there's so much pain associated with that and money, frankly, a lot of financial investment. And so we're developing a tool to say, here are the things that we see in a thriving priesthood. We're going to ask priests to take this assessment to see how they're doing so that we can help support them, and we can give them the tools, and we can point them in the direction, man, you may need a spiritual director right now, Father. I think every priest should have one. So that of course is a gap. Or maybe you need more fraternity and fun. Maybe you need more relationships outside of the parish to help you, process these things and have more fellowship and help you remember who you are outside of that role that you have. There's signs, and we're working with, taking a team approach. We're looking at what are the human things and the aspects of leadership, to what are the mental health needs, to what are the spiritual needs, and helping priests discover where are they at in their priesthood in terms of thriving so that they don't get to that place of burnout. Because Brett, this is a scary statistic. 60% of priests 45 years and under have already experienced burnout in their priesthood.
Whoa.
So 60% of these young men that love the Lord, right? They've given their lives to him. 60% of them 45 years and under are already experiencing burnout. So we have to solve that problem. That's an urgent problem that we solve as a church. So this tool will help with that. So right now we're building some assessments. We do the cohorts and the coaching, and then we also work with bishops. We do convocations and priest gatherings, and we also work with bishops and their teams. If they say, gosh, we want to be thriving on the leadership level, we support bishops in helping their leadership team live all this out as well.
That is so awesome. Matthew, tell everybody that's listening where they can go to find out more and connect with you.
So chrismpriest.com. So chrismpriest.com is our website. And you can email me, matt@chrismpriest.com. If you have any questions, if you'd like to get engaged, even just schedule an initial call. We'll do 30 minutes with any priest that's curious just to learn more. So go to our website and take the next steps from there.
That sounds awesome. I think we're going to have to pause here, but what that means is there's still so much more to talk about. So we're going to have to jump on the podcast again in a future episode if you're open to that.
That sounds great, Brett.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate, Matthew. Thank you for your time here to come on the podcast to share, for your yes to the Lord and to get into this space, for all the ministry, the work, the love that you have in your heart for our clergy, just everything. So appreciate you and what you're doing. And I just pray that God allows it to thrive and that more and more of our beloved clergy will benefit from it. So thank you so very much.